Great. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of Building Life Sciences Adventures. This is session 3 of today and the 7th out of the 2 days, so that's great. And welcome back to those who have joined us already. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we start. Please do keep your microphones on mute if possible. That's much appreciated, and feel free to keep your cameras on and interact. That's absolutely fine. The session, as you can see, is recorded, so you can watch it back in the app and then our YouTube channel shortly. And closed captions are enabled should you need them. Now, thank you for our wonderful panel for joining us today. I'll now hand you over to Kathryn, and I hope you enjoy the session.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It's great to be here. So we're going to talk about why big pharma or why biotech, what's the advantages, disadvantages of each, and how the audience can start to discriminate between the two and what that looks like. So I'd be intrigued before we even start, and if you can chat this out around Lisa, around, who is in the audience in terms of being a job seeker versus being an employer versus even being, I can see there's also some supporters of the industry as well. So be interested in which of those 3 categories you are. So we're going to get started by introducing ourselves and maybe talking about why this is important to both us and our organizations. So to introduce myself, I'm Kathryn Simpson. I'm a consultant and author. I help organizations with leading change. So the reason that this topic is very interesting to me and very important is I'm really keen that people in the sector can choose where they can really contribute and engage most with the organizations they belong to, so that they can enact and enable change and be a leader of change in their organizations. So the choice of whether it's a big organization or a smaller organization is often very critical to how you engage. So that's my rationale. So I'm going to ask Bec maybe to introduce yourself first.
Sure, thank you. Welcome everyone. I'm Bec Johnston. I look after our discovery science team here in Cambridge. I've been with SRG for 7 years and in the industry for about 20 years now. Predominantly, we kind of serve the early stage preclinical discovery startups based in the Golden Triangle, but our reach is across England and Wales, and it can be big pharma as well. So this kind of conversation and debate, if you like, is kind of really relevant to the talent kind of market that we serve and also the businesses that we partner with as well. So yeah, that's the background for me.
Thank you, Bec. Let's go to Dave. Hi, Dave.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me along today and joining some very knowledgeable and experienced people in the industry. So my name is Dave Mead. I'm head of commercial at a biotech called Isogenica. We're Cambridge, UK based. I think I'm what they call a lifer in biotech and biopharma. I've been in there since I left academia a few years ago. I'm not a HR person, but I do appreciate just how critical people are to a company. Companies are always about people, whether it's a biotech, pharma, or your local cafe, it's always about people. So we're looking forward to the discussion and answering any questions or points that people have got. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dave. Ricky.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ricky Martin. I'm the founder of a company called HRS Hyper Recruitment Solutions. So similar to Bec, I work on the talent side, be it a different business. I've got 20 years experience, pretty much the same as Bec, actually, interestingly, in life science recruitment. But my background is I'm a biochemist by academics. I'm also an active member of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Chemistry. And as an organization, we work with big and small pharma, biotech, advanced therapy companies, and that's UK, Europe, and US. So I've got an opinion and I've got insight on whether you're looking at big business, small business, mid-sized business, and it's horses for courses.
That's great. And before we get started, maybe it would be a good idea just to share a moment in our lives, in our careers, where we did sort of get attracted to either a smaller organization or a bigger organization. And why was that? Why did we make that? Why did we make that decision? And that might be something that the audience is interested in. So, Dave, let me start with you.
Well, that's a really interesting question. It's a bit like saying, what's your favourite film or book, isn't it? I think for me, I was in academia, as everybody here, I'm sure, was. And I was pootling along, doing my science, etc. And then an opportunity came up in a small biotech. And it sounds trite. It felt right. There were many challenges. Life in a small company can be interesting. It can have its ups and it can have its downs and so forth. But it really felt as if you could move the dial. And I think I was still a scientist, but I felt it was different. I was actually applying my science towards arguably a more meaningful endpoint than doing academic research and teaching and so forth. So that was, I think, my moment of not eureka, but it just felt the right place to be.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? So it's that time where you think, hey, that's just feels the right thing to do for me. Bec, what about you?
Yeah, I was reflecting on this earlier actually, and I don't know that my choice was as intentional as, do I want to be in a big or a small organization? I just really wanted to be in the science, and being kind of lucky enough to be based in Cambridge, there certainly was that opportunity in abundance. My background is very commercial, my recruitment background, and even kind of prior to that, I worked in big brand household retail names. I went into recruitment, but it was commercial. But a lot of the companies I worked with were scientific organizations. And I realized the more I got to know them and work with them, the more interested I became in what they were actually doing, why they set up, what needs they set up to address, and decided I wanted to get to know the science. I'm not, unlike everybody else probably in this call, I'm not a scientist by academics or trade. So I've always been a recruiter, but my core interest has always been in STEM. So there was an opportunity for me to do that. I mean, SRG is a similar to HRS. We're UK wide, Europe and US, but we run very much like a lot of our startups that we work with do, in a more kind of an independent, nuanced, small kind of verticals sort of way. So I had that opportunity to be part of a bigger brand, but work in a very kind of small and high touch kind of way, which I really enjoy. So yeah, it's not as intentional for me, but I've kind of feel like I've ended up where I'm meant to be.
Yeah, well, that's great. What about you, Ricky?
Less design, but if I was to think, coming out of university with an undergraduate degree in biochemistry, all I knew is I wasn't a very good scientist. I grew E. coli for too many hours, for too many days, and it kind of sucked the life out of doing practical science for me. So I knew I wanted to engage with the sector and work with it. Where I actually found is joining a very big billion-pound recruitment company. I felt that was a good natural home for me because I've been able to learn some very, very good standards. Sometimes I look at business thing, you can learn things on the fly in something small, or you can learn the kind of the world-class basics really, really well in a big company who are AIM listed, who have structures, who have processes. So for me as a scientist, I took the route of, I'll go to a place where I can learn process, I can learn structure, and I can understand scale and opportunity. And I can see different types of recruitment outside of what I did, which was the sciences, which was brilliant to start my career. And then as that career grew, I was like, actually, there's more impact I think I could have towards the sciences and through talent if I was something a little bit more. When it was a startup, I got some investment and started the company. So I've seen both sides, and I think both offer an amazing thing. Smaller startups, you get a lot of autonomy, you can get a lot of freedom, but you can wear 5 or 6 hats every single day, versus a big company, you might wear one hat and you're very, very good at that hat. But I could learn lots of processes. So I see upsides on both sides, and different parts of my career, I believe I benefited from being in both.
Yeah, and I definitely relate to that because so I was a chemist originally, and I can say to people now, hey, I've worked with big organizations like Unilever, Mars, KPMG, and GlaxoSmithKline, and that gives me a certain cachet and credibility that people start to go, oh, okay, then maybe you've done some exciting things in your time, and especially the GSK one in the biotech industry, which is interesting in itself. But also one of the things that I really appreciated about my career is that fantastic grounding that I got at the big organizations. But when I decided to go by myself, I intentionally started to work with smaller organizations as well, because that's the place where you can get things done. And, you know, within Mars, I worked in a small division, and within GSK, I was in a local operating company. So I was within small, within big as well, which has this real advantage, as you were saying, Ricky, about, you know, you can really get things done and make things happen. And as someone who really is a bit of a change person, I usually use the word change junkie, but that's but to make things happen, the smaller organizations are often the best. So let's actually talk about the premise of the question is about, well, is there really competition then for talent between big pharma and biotech? And why do we think that is? And what do organizations really offer? And we've already touched on some of those things, but Bec, I don't know, you want to, I know when we were talking, you were talking about that building of skill sets.
Yeah, sure. I think, again, on the face of it, the question for me when I work with some of the businesses that we partner with and the talent that we find for them, at first I thought there isn't really any competition, because it's different environments attract different people, and they kind of tend to kind of stay in their lanes. But then as I thought about it, I thought, you know, depending on the skill set that you bring as a candidate at any one time in your career, and depending on what phase or stage the business is at, whether it's moving from research to development or development to manufacturing or going through the regulatory affairs process, depending on what that business is needing, there may be a time in your career where you are the most attractive person, and therefore the skill set that you bring is what they want to buy. So broadly speaking, you could say that the two aren't in competition, but they are at particular times depending on what they want and what you want from them. So I think there's certain times where you will see that transition between maybe academia and industry, and that industry, whether it's big pharma or whether it's a small startup biotech space. I think you just have to kind of always be very well networked, really, and pick your moment, both as the company that wants to buy that talent and as the talent that wants to make a move in your career. And it may only be a sideways move. It might not be promotional. It may just be to try a different environment. But I think the key thing is always just being very networked, sharing of ideas. I mean, science and STEM in general wants you to have that curiosity and drive to keep learning and keep sharing. So I think it's just making sure that you're kind of networking with your kind of your own community within a business, but also the wider space as well.
Yeah. So that's interesting, isn't it? Just that idea of let's just network, let's just understand what's going on, and making sure that the skills that we're building are still useful skills, but for the employers to be understanding who's out there as well, and be open, I think, to different areas, and be, you know, not necessarily thinking that if I'm in a biotech, I need biotech people or I need academic people. So thinking about those, being open to that. Yeah. Ricky, what did you think in terms of the idea of the question? Is there competition between pharma and biotech?
Well, answer is yes. Ultimately, you can leave, whether you're leaving a company or leaving academia, your skills are highly transferable to different spaces. Very, very transferable. If you think of, I don't know, somebody who's worked with, pick an example, some type of downstream processing activities working with the purification and characterization of antibodies. You can apply that into an R&D environment, or you can apply that into a CDMO environment, or you can apply that into a startup kind of tech platform place. So the competition is there. I think that the talent themselves sometimes determine where that talent is better suited. So based upon your skill set, I think Bec used the word that I use quite often, which is curiosity. If you're a curious person, you might find that a more research-orientated environment is quite good, or a role where you're doing process improvements within a manufacturing might be quite interesting. We also need to remember that we can't lump all big pharmas into one bucket, because you could take a big pharmaceutical company and you use GSK as an example, and I know names change all the time and areas grow, areas shrink, but there's times where they've got a consumer health brand. There's times where they've got an advanced therapy part of the business. There are times where they're focused on devices. So you've all of a sudden got lots of SME businesses within a big pharma, and then within those SMEs, you almost have startup areas that are doing startup innovation. So taking a step back, I would say we can't say that every big multinational business is just big pharma, because actually they could be a collaboration of small organizations that are networked together that create a big business. I think the approach to finding a job in there probably then becomes big pharma, big process, big corporate machine, big supply chain, applications here, stages here. The process of maybe getting appointed gets very big pharma. But when you're in those teams, you can't look at a small division in innovation within a big pharma as thinking this is a huge business. You need to be looking at it as a business unit. So going back to your question, is there competition? Yes, there is. But sometimes that competition knows what's better for them. And by interviewing and assessing and getting a feel for those businesses, or networking, like an event like this, networking with people that work in those places to give you examples and a feeling of what it's really like, can help the talent determine where they believe they're better suited.
Yeah, that idea of like the small within big, I think is definitely worth thinking about, because I've experienced that in Mars, actually, when I was in a very small startup within Mars. It was very autonomous. And also when I was at GSK, and that we had, I was in the Canadian organization, which meant that we were away from the big corporate offices. So it felt very different. And I guess as big pharma's requiring small biotechs, that feels different. But then there's the opposite that Dave just chatted to us in terms of, there's the stay in your lane philosophy that sometimes big pharma had. And I know in the conversation that we had before, we were talking about the ability potentially to hide a little bit in some of the big pharmas, where there's much more sense of accountability in some of the smaller organizations. And I wanted to bring you in here, Dave, because you talked about that a little bit all in our pre-discussion, but also your comments about some of your decisions that you made.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I've been very fortunate. I have and continue to enjoy my career in this sector. I've enjoyed big pharma, so I've been through, well, what was Novozymes, the big Danish biotech company, now Noventis. They rebadged in a merger about 3-4 weeks ago. GSK again, Aventis, which became Sanofi, and then smaller biotechs such as Isogenica, Albimedics, Delta, and so forth. There's no right, there's no wrong, they're just different. And for me, I think I gained something from all of the experiences. I think we've touched on it already. Larger companies, more established companies will have developed processes and systems. You can learn from those, which are invaluable to a small company, which is often scrabbling around, particularly in startup mode. There's a structure. You can see the full development from discovery all the way through to regulatory, filing, and market and production. So you can see an awful lot there, but at the same time, you can be siloed in some organizations because you don't always get to experience that. And back to a small organization, I think you do come across all of the challenges, whether it be financial, technical, or whatever they might be, and so forth. So is there competition? Yes, I think there is competition. Do we self-select? Perhaps we do self-select. You can talk about risk and stability. And I've had colleagues who've left small biotechs next to me because they felt there was a risk coming up and they wanted a stable income, home life, etc. Joined a big pharma, and then sadly you see that division suddenly changes or disappears, and they're back in the dole queue where they thought they were going to be 6 months earlier. So I know I used to work in Denmark. We all said the only certainty was uncertainty. And I think you have to grasp the uncertainty because that's your opportunity, whether it's in a large or small pharma. I think that's where sometimes being pushed towards the door actually sharpens up, and not because you don't become complacent. So I'm sure there is competition. Perhaps it's more so from the company side than there is from the individual side. What are they looking for? And there are these structures in bigger organizations, whether it be pharma or other types, that inevitably have to show specialisms. In the small company, I think you've already mentioned, many hats on many days. And if the milk needs getting in, or you need to talk to somebody from outside council, then that's what you do, because that's where it is. So I think it will self-select eventually to the person's desires.
Right. Yeah. So let's maybe you touched on risk there, and the risk piece, and I think when we look back in the day, for those who've been even more than 20 years in the industry, you look back and that's definitely how it used to be, wasn't it? The big pharma was the job for life, and the small organizations were not. And that seems like that's definitely shifted. So if we are a risk-averse individual, what would be your recommendation? And Bec, I'm going to come to you, and then Ricky, I'm sure, is going to add to this as well, around, if I don't like risk, I want stability, what do I do? How do I approach the market?
I think, again, it's very individually led, because risk can really motivate some people. It can, and they will lean towards more of a startup funded biotech kind of setting, because it really hones their creativity, and they like that ambiguity. They like changes in direction. But equally, if somebody's quite risk averse and they like process, they like a well-trodden path, perhaps they like to see representation of what's gone before them, so they know exactly what a very defined career path in a certain business will look like for them. Perhaps then a more established, an SME or a big pharma environment will be more attractive to that person. But let's be honest, especially over the last year post-COVID, certainly even those big pharma organizations, or the very well-established businesses that have done very, very well, that hasn't necessarily always made them a safe environment necessarily, because as you said, you can have small within big, and in that case some departments, some divisions, or some teams haven't stood the test of time because the company ultimately has changed direction. So I think it again is very individually and case by case led. There's no crystal ball, and there's no model or factor that will definitely work. It's all a human factor. So I don't know that there is a kind of a real true answer to that question. So I would always, and I always advise people, where do you feel more comfortable, and what really interests you the most? And that really is as good as you're going to get, because it can just change. It can just change kind of any day, any week. So do the thing that you love. Surround yourself with good people. Build your network. And if any of that changes, there's no reason why you can't be the change, and you can't be that variable that changes. You don't need to wait for the business to change around you, be it big, be it small, and whatever your risk motivator is.
Yeah, thank you. Ricky, do you have, I'm sure you do have thoughts.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never got an opinion. No, honest answer is you can't de-risk. You can't de-risk your career. You just cannot. To sit here and think, what do I make a choice to absolutely make sure that I've got a job for life? It's just not kind of a reality. You have to be, using David's analogy a moment ago in Denmark, I think David mentioned, the only thing you can be certain of is uncertainty, and that's a reality, right? Like 30 years ago, everything's small molecule, then it became large molecule, then it was advanced therapies, and then people didn't hit their clinical milestones, so advanced therapies shrunk, but they'll go again. So like, you can pick the most pioneering area of science, and it either runs out or it speeds up. And if you want to, like, small things, if you want to try and de-risk yourself, then yeah, go and move to a part of the country where there's a significant population of businesses. So Cambridge, Oxford, some of those areas. If you do that and one business fails, you might not have to upstitch your family again, because there might be some. So you can do small logistical factors to de-risk. The only way that I think that you can, to a small extent, risk is there. Accept it. Whether people want to hear that or not, it's there. It's not going away, and I don't think it ever will. If you really want to maximize chance of success, but logistical things to one side, then make sure you are extremely well networked. Make sure you know who are in the marketplace. Make sure you build that connection book. It's a really horrible sales thing, but people say your network is your net worth, right? So you know enough people, you connect enough places. If I'm not going to use the word, if something that begins with an S and ends with a T hits the fan, then that network, if you're well networked within it and you give mutual value in it, is probably going to help you out over time. And you might open doors through that network, whether that is third-party agencies like what Bec and I do, whether that's directly to someone, whether it's someone you worked with 20 or 30 years ago who just thought you were a genuinely great person, would love to work with you again. So, but risk is there. It's not going away. You can't de-risk it. Small tactics, move to a location with a great population, but really build that network. And they're the only ways that you can maximize chances. And do you know what? A lot of people love the risk. It's what gets them out of bed.
Well, that's
I just add to what Bec and Ricky were saying. I think it's a good point about the de-risking geographically. I mean, I've worked in more remote parts of the world where there's been little similar business around us, so it is more of an upsticks as you describe it. I think one way to de-risk is what you've talked about. I think a key word is networks. I think a key word is adding to your experiences and your expertise, because that's the way you will de-risk it. It also gives you opportunities, not just managing risk, but opportunities to do different things or to grow into different areas as well. So I think you can help de-risk yourself by sort of grasping some of these opportunities that come along.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go is, you know, I think if you can add skills to your set and keep abreast of what's going on here. So using AI, for example, right now, like we all need to do that and think about how we're doing that, and just to continue to be abreast of some of those skills so that you're building your portfolio and skills, if you like, so you'll be eminently transferable wherever you end up working. So we've talked about a little bit about employees and looking for jobs. So let's think about the other side, because it's becoming more important and it's a partnership, that employers are looking for great talent as well. So what do you think employers have to do, and what do you think some of those key factors are in attracting talent? Dave, we talked about culture, I know, when we spoke. So do you want to kick us off on that thought?
Thank you. I can try. Culture is an often used word, and we all strive for this good culture. I wouldn't profess to know what it really can be defined as, but let's think about it. Yeah, whether it's big pharma or smaller companies, what do you want? You want to employ smart, often inquisitive. We heard the word inquiring before. Inquisitive people who've got a drive. They're people who want to achieve something. They do. Of course it's about the money. Let's not be bashful about that. But of course, people actually want to have, I find, generally something more than that out of their careers as well. That they've done something, they feel motivated, they get the famous out of bed in the morning, all those sort of phrases we've heard, really. So what can we do about it? I think as a company, if you can be inclusive, and again, that's an oft-used word. Personally, I'm a great believer in empowering people. I've been lucky to be part of and have a number of teams over the years, and they're all brighter and better than me. That's my view. So why not use their 10 brains and experiences rather than my own? So I think you empower people. People like to have that responsibility. Not everybody, but mostly people do. The type of people I come across in our sector, in the different functions, they like that. They feel that they are making this difference, really. And again, perhaps the small company, we heard it before, perhaps the decision-making cycle and the necessary speed of change is quicker, so it's less frustrating. In big organizations, it can be, well, in my experience, at times can be slower. So I think we've got to recognize people. Back to where I started, people make a company. Whether it's the corner shop or GSK, it's always about the people. They are your most valuable asset. And I know that sounds like I'm just rolling out some catchphrases, and I'm sure Ricky and Bec and Kathryn can relate to that, but it is about those people. And it's from the top, how you create that culture, how you build that team. And really a team is often a blend, not just of skills, but also characteristics, people interactions as well.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask both Bec and Ricky, because they're in the business of of recruiting people. I'd be interested, do you have any either horror stories or success stories where companies did a great job of saying, hey, this is what our culture is, and really attracting talent because of that the way that they either did or didn't sell their culture? Bec, did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I worked really closely with a business a couple of years ago, and they were a startup. They just got quite a large funding round of Series B, and they wanted to at least double their workforce, but they really didn't have, other than a landing page on their website that gave very, very basic brief info. They really didn't have anything that told anybody what they were, who they were about, what they were about, visions, values, what their employee value proposition was. And I helped them to kind of craft that and go to market with a strong kind of sense of, this is who we are, this is what we do, these are the people that we want, and almost just kind of own the fact that that might not be for everybody, but if you join us, you can come with us on this journey, and respect if you don't want to be part of that, but we're very clear about who we are. So I think when you're a company trying to attract talent, you really need a strong EVP. You need to stand by that. And you also, probably one good thing this particular organization did was actually put together a personalized career development pathway. When people came for their final kind of site interview and they were really at decision stage of whether I want to be part of this business, to give them a sense of what your job will look like the day you start, and what the next incremental kind of stage with this would look like, where you can see yourself, not necessarily putting where you'll be in 5 years, 10 years, etc., but what that would look like. And that really stood them apart from the much more established organizations, where there was an assumption and an expectation about what their career path would look like, because they could look on LinkedIn and see people in the business and what stages they'd gone through. They couldn't do that with this company. They were too small and they were an unknown. So they did a lot of personalized work and very kind of individually created a pathway for each person that they had to come in. And resoundingly, every offer that they made, they had an acceptance. And the feedback from the candidate side was, I felt like these people really listened to what I can bring as an individual, and they crafted something for me, and nobody else did that. So that was a really compelling kind of bit of feedback from the talent market.
Yeah, so listening, but you also talked about, for me, the words that you're using there were around clarity, just being very clear about what it is that your culture is, as much as you can be, and defining what that is and exemplifying that through what you're putting out in social media and your website, but also then in the interview process. So, and then what you also, so there are two pieces there, culture and career development, really important for organizations to think about and how they're expressing that. Ricky?
Yeah, I'm going to look at some practical things and probably more some problems that I've seen with processes, because you can have the best culture in the world, but nobody gets that. Or you could sell a really great store and you turn up and it's hell on earth. And both those things do happen. I think one of the key practical things from a hiring perspective, if I was a customer, is just making sure that the people who are in the interview process are representative of the culture and the team that they're going to be joining. So let's forget the big boys right now, because there's loads of, if you think of a team, you're joining a team, whether it's big or small companies, if you only meet one member of that team and there's 5 in that team, you only understand 20% of the variable within that. You meet 3 people in that team, you're going to understand 60%. It's a fair chance that if you left that meeting thinking, God, great to work with them, or I'd hate to work with them, at least you've got a slightly better idea to make a decision. So it's when companies don't have a good enough representation of the culture of the team that they're joining at the interview process. And I don't know, it happens sometimes the more technically inclined the role becomes, because we need to identify, I don't know, we're looking for a QP and somebody can release batches and understand the kind of regulations. You're looking for a discovery science, you need to know how they use BioA and you for small or large or whatever it might be. The more technical role, I think companies fall into that trap where they put in a technical expert to assess the technical skills, but they haven't got somebody assessing the behavioral competency, kind of lighter personality type of them. So advice really there is, if you are setting people up to interview, make sure that people in that interview are a good representation of your business, because sometimes if you send in Mr. or Mrs. completely introverted that has 0 personality, even though you might be the best business in the world, they're going to think your business has no personality. So it's the practical bits like that go wrong when customers aren't thinking out that, aren't thinking of making sure that using a panel to make a decision helps to reduce unconscious bias. Using a single person has one person's opinion, as opposed to maybe, and that opinion might be unconsciously incorrect. So they're the things for me. It's companies structuring their process correctly to get the best for all parties. And if you are the job seeker in that party, I always say, please remember, you've got a choice as well. Like, you might want a job, that's maybe why you're there, but actually you might not want that job. And that's not a bad thing. And I probably spend more time speaking to job seekers saying, are you actually really ready to leave? I know you come to me asking for help, but actually your business is great. There's some interesting jobs there. Why don't you go and chat to your boss in your appraisal and actually see if there's something to stay? For me, long-term gain for science is better. And actually I build better relationships on that side, as well as they come out of an interview. How did you feel? What was your gut reaction? A couple of days later, what does your head now say? And actually, if it's not right for you, don't go for it. Come out the process if it's not right, or say no to it if they're interested. So it's just making candidates remember they've got a choice, and making clients and hirers understand that every touch point in that interview process, or dare I say the whole recruitment process, including the agency, if there's an agency like us helping, is representing the brand and is influencing positively or negatively the outcome of that.
Yeah. I want to go to Dave and ask about all his experiences in terms of how, as an employer, you've approached that. And I recognise we've got some comments in the chat, which I'll definitely come to. We'll just finish off on the organisation. So keep adding your thoughts and questions in the chat. But Dave, what's your thoughts around? Have you seen some great practices from employers around the recruitment and attracting talent?
I think so. And I think building on what Ricky said, if you're the interviewing person or persons, you represent the company and what it's about, not just commercially, not just technically, but also you inevitably will osmotically transmit that culture. And I sat in front of interview panels before now, very formulaic, very rigid, shall we say, in how they approach it. Okay, Ricky, question from you. Okay, now Bec, a question from you. And that I just find, for me, is an indicator that it's that type of organisation. I prefer much to have a conversation and engage with people. And I think as an employer, potential employer, you look to engage and be relatively open with people, because there's always a degree of buying, and this is buying again, it's just a different form of buying. It's an emotional transaction. You're not just choosing, which phone you want, you're choosing which company you want to work for or with, and so forth as well. So I think you have to bear that in mind, this emotional element. In my experience, you will have perhaps the hiring manager involved at some point, but also other people, perhaps the peers to that manager, who represent different functions. I think it's great to have a tour of whatever the facility or site might be, because that's an eye-opener as you go around and you see people. It also exposes you to people from different functions or different levels in the organisation as well. So I think to get that exposure, and equally you get that as a potential employer, you get that feedback about the candidates as well. So it's a two-way street. And like I do a lot of deals, I don't really like the phrase win-win, but it's got to suit both people as best as possible. It doesn't mean you don't move on in future, but it really has to. There's no point in it being great for the employer, but not the employers. As Ricky said, they've got all the bump on the walls about what a great culture we have, but they're just pictures on the wall. Do they actually live that culture? It has to sort of come from within in a way. And, we perhaps will come to it, but it's also about retention. Hiring people is a very expensive job. And I don't just mean in terms of recruitment agencies, but it's your own time to go through it all and work out what you want with those people, and then onboarding them. And in many professional jobs, no matter how skilled, you often take 3 months or more before a person really understands where the toilets and the coffee machine are and what the beat of the company is about. So that's, you want to try and get it right. It's more expensive than people realize. It's a real big drag, and that's why it's so important to try and get it right. But perhaps we'll come to retention. I think it's the same view, but different part of the coin. Yeah,
no, that's a great point when we think about retention, because ideally. And, you know, Ricky mentioned it, didn't you, where you said, hey, we need to, sometimes when candidates come, are you really sure that you want to move? Or is it that you want something different in your current organization? And be brave in asking for that. So I remember a time where I did go into my current organization and say, hey, I'm not really happy with this position I'm in. But these are the things that I like doing. I like doing this. I'm good at that. What else could I be doing? And the people in the organization were amazing in terms of, well, here's all of these different opportunities that you can think about. You could think about this or this or this. And sometimes, you know, it's challenging for your direct manager because they don't want to lose you, but they don't want to lose you to the organization either. So I think that's really important in thinking about retention. Don't know whether either Bec or Ricky, you had wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think it is part and parcel of the same thing, and there's different times. I think that transparent relationship goes a very, very long way internally and externally, and it's creating a level of trust between you and your manager that you can have those open dialogues, and the opportunities are there to have them. And there is a point in time going kind of, when I started in recruitment, it was like job for life is what you kept hearing. Then a couple of years later, the credit crunch come along, and all of a sudden I'm trying to help everyone from AstraZeneca and GSK and Pfizer at a job for life who are on the market now, and their world was destroyed. So having those open conversations there, and there are points in time where you want something different, and it might be a different challenge in a new light, in a new culture to expand how you operate. And it's having that relationship where, for me, it's making sure where doors never close, you keep them open. And that's where that transparency. And one key thing to retention is whatever you sell at the acquisition of talent stage, the hiring someone, if it's not real, they will leave. So don't lie about what you are to try and bring people in the door. Be honest. In fact, more people get a job. So like, this company were really honest and told me how much rubbish there was there and what we need to kind of move forward. And actually, Ricky, moving this culture and this challenge and this improvement job is what is going to kind of get me going. So again, transparency between you and manager, and transparency of a business with people coming in. I think that means so much to both attraction and retention.
Fantastic. Bec, anything?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the biggest thing is when you go out to the market to look for talent, whether you're going out yourself to do that recruitment or you're using a consultancy or a partner to help you do that, when you go to market, the feeling of what that first kind of interview process is like, that first touch point, it's got to feel the same when the person starts. It's got to feel the same after 3 months, when their probation ends, and 5 years down the line. Fundamentally, it's got to be the same. And of course, businesses evolve, directions change, and pressures and challenges change, but the feeling of it has got to be the same. Otherwise, that's when, I think, as Ricky was saying, your talent, who's now your employee, suddenly starts to feel like there was a bit of a whitewash, or some, you know, only the good parts were spoken about, only the kind of visions and values, which are just kind of words on the wall when you walk in reception. But are actually people living those values? Are they modeling that behavior? Do you feel like you want to be part of that journey? And that's got to feel the same from the first touch point to the first 3 months in.
Yeah. And, you know, you've kind of hit on a few things that are really critical to me around people managers and how important they are all of the way through the process. And, you know, you don't leave organizations, you leave managers. One of the quotes there, and your piece around living the values, making sure that that's absolutely clear in terms of the behaviors that you show, the behaviors that you role model, the behaviors that you reinforce as well. Give people praise for doing not just the great job in terms of getting outcomes, but how they achieve that. Just so critical to really reinforce the values that you say. Let's move back now as we come to our question time. Any more questions? And finishing off by asking about tips. Laura's asked a great question and Dave's answered it. So that's great. For candidates seeking new job opportunities, should your CV, LinkedIn profiles, which is interesting, a LinkedIn profile, be tailored differently depending on whether you are applying to small biotechs versus large pharma? And Dave said, yeah, I would have thought so. Every job, regardless of company size, is different. So he's tailored CVs specifically for the role. Yeah, again, let's go to who wants to answer that one first?
I'm happy to jump in. Yes, it's a very short and quick answer. if you are so generic with what you're putting in front of a company, it's very, very hard for them to understand the person behind it. I always stand here and say CVs get you interviews, but people get you jobs, because that's what you're actually hiring. So when it comes to a CV, and if you imagine you're in which we are in, is a competitive talent marketplace. There are more people than just you applying. So if you want to be generic and a bit vanilla with your application, assume that the application will come across a bit generic and vanilla, and somebody with more impact might get that interview, even if you are the best person for the job. So look, it's hard when you're applying and you want a job, and you could be applying to lots of jobs and maybe not making traction. It's hard to make a tailored application to absolutely everything, and I can understand that. So small things I would always recommend is just making sure in your profile at the top of the top of the CV, you should have a profile to introduce yourself, and it's tailored to each job. It's not a huge change per role, but you can change the kind of the function or the kind of things you look. That will help to tell the reader that actually what you're applying to is what's in front of them. You might find that you could be a technical person, but you could have opportunities both in the commercial BD world because your technical expertise really helps, or you could go into a technical role. You might find on the technical side, you want to put every technique compliance under the sun. On the commercial role, you might want to talk about the impact to customer and third-party relationships and stakeholder management. So when you're changing discipline, dare I say, and the function, then that's where you have more dramatic changes in what you're writing. When it's the same job for 100 different businesses, that's where you can make some slight subtle changes. But one thing I'll always remind people, if you do that, just make sure you don't do that and send it to the wrong place, because you could sit here and say, oh, I'm really interested in a job at HRS, but you actually sent it to Bec and you want to work for her company. She's like, well, why don't I want you? Apply to my competitor. That happens again and again. Or I've had a client and I've overlooked it. I've sent the most amazing CV with an unbelievable person at the top. They just put something to like really interested to explore the marketing side of a career in marketing. I'm like, you're not applying to marketing. It's kind of BD with a bit of sub-marketing support, input, interaction. So yes, it should be tailored. There's smart ways to do it quickly, so it's not too much time. But if it's departmental, yes, doesn't matter whether it's big or small pharma. It's a job at a business, so that's what you need to look at.
Bec, I'm interested in maybe if there's any additional pieces, but also talk to us about LinkedIn profiles, because you can't change those for every job you're.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything Ricky said in terms of your CV, definitely. In terms of LinkedIn, that's a bit harder because that's something that you can't go in and change your profile every single time you try to connect with somebody or send an application. But you can use some really good AI software to help you to write a really compelling profile. My advice would be to do that and tweak it. Don't just necessarily kind of just ping that out there into the world. But you can craft, it's really important to put some time and energy into crafting the public profile that you want to have in your professional network, because it will help you to form good connections, to maintain good connections, to evolve, to learn. There's loads of great, software and content available in the kind of internet world, and you kind of have to be in it to win it, and you have to be there to be noticed. People most often, if they receive your CV, whether it's through recruiters like us or a direct application that you make, often will have a look at your LinkedIn profile. Some people put it at the bottom of their CV, and they'll do that to make sure that what you're saying on your CV tallies well with this public profile that you have out there, broadly speaking, that you are the same person. So that, again, like what I've said about the feeling of being interviewed and starting in a company has to feel the same. They're going to want to make sure that you feel like the same person from that profile they've maybe received from a recruiter as to what you're putting out there in public as well. So really, I would really encourage spending some good time and regularly revisiting what your LinkedIn profile says about you.
Thank you. Thanks for that advice. I think that's what I need to do, actually, go back and look at that. So thank you for that. Dave, I'm interested from your perspective, what are CVs that really grab your attention and say, hey, yes, I really need this person on my team?
I think we've heard from everybody quite rightly. It is about thinking about the company and thinking about the role that you're applying for, and using the words to describe it. And you can take lots of everyday life analogies from that. But if you're applying to GSK to work in, for example, as Rick said, as a QP, that's very different to applying to an Isogenica to do some VHH discovery work at the bench. And no disrespect to some people, but occasionally you get these very general applications that come through. And I was on an interview panel quite recently, and the guy said, you know, we talked about the reasons why do you want to come to us, all this kind of thing. And it was actually over with a partner, so it was over 2 different geographies, but mainly in Cambridge. And it was all, well, I've got lots of friends in this particular city. I said, but the role's here. Yeah, but I really like this particular city and I've got some great friends there. I mean, it's just like, talk about room 101. You know, and people then, of course, quickly drop out of the drop out of it. But I think it's a lot of the points we've talked about already. Be able to pass the red face test, so you can back what you put in your CV. And Bec's right, there are some wonderful tools out there, and they can make us all look, even me, marvelous. But of course, you will get found out. So it's a bit like a scientist with data. Make sure you can validate it, that there's something behind it. And if they don't catch you out on the day or on your CV, they'll probably go and behind you and check with somebody in the network. It's a small pond, life sciences, relatively. And even if it's not one of your referees, and I often get phone calls, oh, Dave, used to work with such and such a few years ago. Can you just tell me about him, her? So just, you know, I'm not saying people fabricate, but just be aware of that. Yeah.
Great,
We check.
Thank you. Yes, and that's interesting. You know, the kind of alignment that you talked about. It's that making sure that we're aligning, that when you have your CV, your LinkedIn profile, your interview process, all of those things are in alignment, but you're also customizing, and you're also thinking very clearly about why it is you want that specific job and what you're going to bring to it. Another question. So from Paige, we've discussed how skill sets are competitive across big pharma and startups, but how can candidates best showcase they have the right competencies, mindsets when taking that leap from big pharma to startups or vice versa? Let's talk about the big pharma to startups first. And so maybe, Bec, could you talk about that? And then we'll talk about the other way around.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, predominantly that's the move that I support people trying to make, because most of the partners I work with are the startups and the early stage organizations. And joining a business like that's always exciting and attractive to people from big pharma, because their interpretation is that they're going to get the opportunity to be more broadly involved with the running and understanding of the running of a growing business. So they'll get to wear those many hats. They'll be involved perhaps in more financial decisions, things like supply chain, things like suppliers, for example, changes of directions, and that's a lot more exciting, I think, for people moving in that direction. So I think if you're looking at a CV or an application, and why should a small startup biotech want someone from big pharma, what you need to be kind of displaying on that kind of written representation of yourself is all the times, I guess, where you've had to use your creativity, work perhaps in an ambiguous setting. It could be during a period of change management, maybe where the company has had to downsize and then grow again, which happens a lot in big pharma. Really kind of emphasizing that your job isn't a pure vertical and that you are working across maybe a multidisciplinary workforce. So all those kind of examples, getting that sort of out there from the very beginning, will be the attractive factors that recruiters working with you or companies looking at your CV will want to see to showcase why you can make that change.
Great, thank you. Ricky, do you want to talk? Can you talk about the other way around? How do you make yourself, if you've worked in a small biotech and you're looking for a big pharma job, how do you make that attractive?
I actually think the harder question to answer here is how do you get competencies across full stop? Because they're slightly harder to quantify when you're making applications to jobs and put it in front. But so when I look at that side, I mean, a lot of this is going to come out of the interview process, probably more so than the application process, that I would say. And for me, with some of the things Bec said, is that's where you need to intrinsically start thinking about what the company is looking for. And a really good telltale is to go into an organization and really look at their value set, look at their set of values, and look at where you can demonstrate that, because you might find that one of the values is innovation, or they might have something where people working in periods of ambiguity. All of those things can help you to structure yourself ready for an interview, ready to present that. Covering letters, if they are applicable, are really quite useful to start talking through where you think your skills are transferable. Or when you're working with third parties, agencies, our kind of role is to act as almost a real life covering letter to talk through our findings for the behaviours that we've identified in line with what a company's looking for. So the bigger piece here is how do you get competencies and mindsets across, because CVs are quite linear. They're quite kind of like computer says yes or no. But when you're looking at big farmers, I mean, what are big farmers normally doing? They've got scale, they're global, they might have matrix management, but you're not always sat next to the person that you're working with. It's how you can operate through a supply chain, I would put it, and how you've connected with customers, internal or external. I think when you start looking at big places, you need to start thinking people are everywhere, and the scale of these projects is big, and the cost of them is big, and the impact can be quite detrimental if wrong. So it's starting to think where you've been involved in that outside of just what you do day to day in the role. And sometimes it's what you do outside of work can show how well you can open that up.
So it's much more in the interview stage where you think that that's really important in being able to describe that.
It's so hard at CVs because people don't have that much time to look through hundreds and hundreds of CVs and read every single word that's put in there. That's part of the conundrum, right?
Thank you so much, everybody. We're coming to our end here. So I just, as a quick summary, you know, some of the things that I heard there around, you know, it's so important for it to be very consistent. If you're a job seeker, to think about where your skills can really come to bear, how you customize your applications, thinking about the different pieces of the journey. If you're an employer, making sure you're very clear on your value proposition, what your values are, being able to demonstrate what that looks like with more than one individual, a panel, and then to make sure that you're thinking about, you know, how you retain the critical importance of one of my topics is on people managers and so on. So great panel, great discussions. I hope you all got lots of takeaways from that. It was really good to hear all your insights. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
everyone.
Kathryn.
Thank you. Before we all disconnect, just to remind you, our last session of the day and the conference is at 2 o'clock on UK versus US. Recruitment and career talks, so please do dial in if you can. And we will also be announcing our winner for the Life Science Inspiration of the Year award, so please do join us to congratulate who the winner is. So thank you very much, everyone, and the panel is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.